Hey boys and girls, in this little lesson, we'll call it Interest Group Strategies. You're going to learn the first part of the two types of strategies interest groups can use. The goal here is to identify both direct techniques and then later on indirect techniques that interest groups use to influence decisions made in government. Let's start off with the key. The key to influencing government decisions itself is access to government officials. We've spoken earlier about the many cracks that are in our government that allow interest groups, people with money, elites, to get into the system, infiltrate it, and make a difference, positive and negative. Interest groups can't normally get Congress to endorse programs, but they can do certain things. They can, for example, weaken or block injurious laws to their businesses. They can also, of course, support laws and things like that. And we've learned in the Iron Triangle that Congress, the bureaucracy, which are those elected officials and unelected officials that run government, and interest groups have a direct relationship with one another. And it goes both ways, this way, and it also goes in the opposite direction. Okay, so they're all related to each other. There's two types of techniques. This one, we're going to focus on direct techniques, but I'm also going to just touch on indirect. So for direct techniques, let's define it as this: approaching officials personally to influence government. It would be like waiting in the lobby of the Senate or the House of Representatives to speak personally to an individual. Indirect techniques are using third parties, parties that you might pay or support as an interest group to influence government officials. Okay, so it's not direct contact, it's contact through another person or through another avenue. Let's focus in on direct techniques specifically. This picture right here is going to represent petitioning, getting people's signatures or support to get something done. We know what lobbying is. Lobbying is using money and other influences to get what you want in politics. But lobbying comes from the practice of petitioning legislators, like literally waiting in lobbies of the lawmaking chambers. This really started in Parliament over in Europe, but it continued regularly in the United States once we became a country. A little history. In the 1800s, when our country was forming, right around the end of the Civil War between the North and the South over slavery and states' rights, the railroad companies were trying to expand over our country, shown in this map here. We have the Union Pacific stretching from east to west. We have the Northern Pacific in the northern parts near Minnesota. We have the Central Pacific. The Chinese started that one and worked on that one. And then down in the south, we have the Southern Pacific Railways. But in 1800, there were a series of railroad companies that used money as bribes to gain an edge, and this would be a form of lobbying. And I just want to illustrate it to show you the significant power of an interest group. So here's the story of Credit Mobiler scandal. Government's loans were given to the Union Pacific Railroad from New York to Chicago and then later to Promontory, Utah here to meet up and create a transcontinental railroad. And the Union Pacific Railroad Company hired a construction company known as Credit Mobiler to build the tracks themselves. Only Credit Mobiler overcharged Union Pacific Railroad. They charged them $94 million with an M dollars, and the cost was only $50 million. So it's a net profit of $44 million that went to the railroad execs themselves. And what happened is Credit Mobiler overcharged, and they started to influence politicians a little bit. They used apparently $9 million in bribes to influence politicians in things like stock offerings. And it wasn't investigated for some years after in 1872. So that's just one example of how interest groups can lobby and be very, very powerful. Today, most lobbyists are professional firms such as Patton Boggs, Did a little research on them, didn't really find out much other than that they're a law firm today out on the East Coast. Um, but things that lobbyists can do that would be considered direct techniques would be sharing valuable information. Remember, they have access to lots of valuable data that can persuade politicians one way or another. They can testify in committees. This is something we haven't talked about, but it is giving evidence while a House or the Senate is studying a bill, for example, before it's a law, just basically sharing evidence why things are or are not needed. We have advising lawmakers in drafting laws. We've talked about think tanks and the information that they can generate to support a cause. We can invite legislators to social occasions. Nowadays there's a limit on some of the gifts that people can get, but you can host a party or a dinner, and with all the fixings and all the lavish, um, uh, really, really expensive perks, and really persuade groups that way. You can provide political information. Often this is used um, to know where voting is coming from and how many votes there could possibly be for a bill or for a candidate. Pretty powerful. Think of memberships. If Credit Mobile employed 50,000 people, they would probably vote for a politician who they want to see help support Credit Mobile building the Transcontinental Railroad. Lastly, we got supply nominations, and these interest groups, they can supply people to serve in federal positions in the executive branch if necessary. So there you have it. Direct techniques, and we're on to some other ones. So the first direct technique, number one, if I were to label it here, would be lobbying. Okay, and these are ways you can lobby. All right. Number two is going to be the ratings game. Okay, and I got a couple examples here for you. Interest groups provide interested parties with positive or embarrassing political ratings to support their cause. Here's an example. Only 17% of people supported the building of Trump's border wall. That said, I did a little research to find out some more ratings games. Think about Republican interest groups. They would typically probably shine a lot of brightness or light on Donald Trump and how much support his policies or qualities or characteristics there were. Look at these numbers. 80% or more supported, the things that he did, his confidence, his promises that he kept. But if we compare it to the Democrats, it's the complete opposite, extremely low. So these rating games, these interest groups can play, can really impact who supports them. Is it CNN who would primarily show worse ratings, or would it be Fox News who would maybe show Donald Trump in a little better light? Gotta watch for that. All right, for your first task, I want you to learn about coalitions, which is going to be our third way that we would say is a direct technique. So number three, but Google search coalition, give me a definition, and then click on images and find a suitable image for it. Go ahead and do that now, so pause the video. All right, now that you're back and you're queued up on the video, let's go through building coalitions. A coalition is a fancy word of saying an alliance, and that's probably what you determine in definition and picture. And it is used to typically share expenses and multiply your influence. So if we gather in these alliances, we can share expenses, extreme costs, and we can multiply our influence, but we can also blur specific interests and make it appear that we are really for a larger good, let's say for all males or for all females, when we have a very specific agenda, whether it might be for, raising the minimum wage for everybody, or raising the wages for women in the workplace. We may support more democratic ideas. How can coalitions affect lawmaking? This is a longer answer, so take some time to type this in. Is this: you don't really see real issues. You don't see the real issues at hand. They are hidden in favor of getting people in office that will pass your desirable legislation. Okay? So these coalitions are supporting the individuals to help get their laws passed. All right, we've got a fourth direct technique here that interest groups use to get what they want, and that is going to be campaign assistance. Remember, a campaign would be defined as how one would run for election, and this is pretty powerful because interest groups know that re-election is super important to lawmakers. Interest groups focus more on their campaigns as a result of it. Okay, they focus on campaigns because they know interest group lawmakers are relying on re-election because they can make a fair amount of money. You know, the average that a lawmaker makes is close to $200,000 a year. Associations like labor unions, they use their big membership. Remember the what is it? AARP has like 40 million followers and members. These people can be given a task to pass out flyers, and 40 million people can get a lot of things done. How many phone calls can 40 million people make? A lot. And they can also run precincts, which are sections of a city when it comes to elections and just general campaign work. All right. For our last thing here, last point in campaign assistance, I want you to look at Citizens United versus the FEC. This was a major Supreme Court decision that makes it legal or allowable for unions, interest groups, and businesses to advertise and spend money for or against candidates who are running for office. So this is where we would see this court case allows people to put ads against Donald Trump, but also for him. Okay, same with Biden. All right, your final task for 7.5a's lesson is going to be to do an investigation of Citizens United. This is super interesting and powerful, and I wish I could spend more time on it, but this is what I'm going to have you do is watch this video. So click on this link and answer these 8 questions below, and then finally find a picture, any picture about Citizens United versus the FEC using Google Images, paste that right here in this space, and then study that picture. Go to the picture's website and find out what that picture means. So give me a summarized description. That's all I have for you, boys and girls. Thanks for tuning in today.